All right, everybody. I appreciate you all coming on tonight. Today, I decided to do this Bible study with basically going over some of the verses that we've already covered in the End Times Bible study that we did. However, I wanted to kind of focus in a particular area. So, um, real quick, Rick, are you able to do anything or no at this point?
He probably isn't.
No, okay. All right. So let me see if I can share the screen real quick and see if we can. I don't quite remember how to share the screen. So he usually does all this stuff for me. Let's see here. All right, share. I guess the desktop. No, I'll scare. There you go. I'm going to share this Google Chrome portion. Okay. Can you guys see my screen share of the? Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a little further away, but if yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. So, what I want us to do is I want us to read here in Luke 21, just a few verses so that we can kind of get a context where I want to go with this. Okay. Luke chapter 21 is where Jesus is talking about those events that precede the beginnings of sorrows. Okay. And I want to focus on a couple of specific ones, specific verses. Okay. Primarily, I want to focus on Luke chapter 21, verse 24 through verse 25. All right. I'm sorry, verse 24 all the way through verse 26. And it says here that they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Father, I just pray that you would touch each and every one of us today as we listen to this Bible study, as we go over your word. I pray, Lord God, that our hearts would be moved, Lord God, to draw closer to you, that our minds would be just focused on making preparations to come into your presence, to be ready to stand before you, Lord God. And I thank you for everybody who's on today. I pray your blessing over each and every person. And I ask you all these things in Jesus' name, that everyone here might be blessed. Amen. Okay, so we went ahead and I want to kind of put things a little bit in perspective here. Um, let's see here. Okay. So with regards to these verses that we just read, um, when we did the Bible study on the end times, I had touched on how I believe that we are in between in the timeline that we are currently in between verses 24 and 25. Uh, and because of that, I wanted to entitle this Bible study Between the Verses, because this tells us where we kind of are in anticipation of certain events. Okay. Um, the so if you really, think about it, I needed to kind of give some clarification on some of the things that I had mentioned before, not because I think that anybody gets confused, but I wanted to kind of emphasize something here. Jesus gives a lot of information, okay? Particularly in verse 24, and I think I'm going to focus a lot on verse 24 today, where it says, "They shall fall by the edge of the sword." This is referring to the children of Israel in the land of Israel, okay? "And they shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." There's actually a lot going on in that verse, and I kind of wanted to work on that, okay? Specifically on one of the terms that Jesus uses here, referring to the times of the Gentiles. Okay. Um, it doesn't necessarily mean when we read that passage, it doesn't mean that the times of the Gentiles officially ended just because it was fulfilled. Okay. It just means that the minimum conditions have been reached so the for the saturation point needed for the next events to begin, all right, or to ascend to begin to start coming to pass on the other portions. Okay. Uh, what you may not realize is that I didn't pick the dates. One of the things that I mentioned was that the that Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And I had mentioned in the previous study that I believe that that event was focused specifically on the Six-Day War in June of 1967. Okay. Um, I wasn't arbitrary in that date, and I think I wanted to kind of touch on a couple things to kind of show you the why I think that the June 67 date is a fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles. Okay. Um, and we're going to go into the details of that. All right. Now, in order for me to get to that portion, I kind of need to build my case a little bit to kind of help you understand where we're going with this idea about the times of the Gentiles. Okay. There's a lot of conservative scholars that basically say that the times of the Gentiles actually started before 70 AD. It actually started before the scattering of the Jews that Jesus talks about. All right, he's referring to a time period that had actually begun many, many years earlier. Okay, uh, and that it actually began when Israel was carried away captive into Babylon. All right. There's a number of different scholars from David Levy to Gary Gromacki, John Wolford, Roy Zuck, and a bunch of other scholars. I just listed like four names just because they're there. People that have been uh, you know consistent with that. But it's not just conservative scholars. There's other groups as well. I believe the Jehovah's Witnesses also agree with that idea of the times of the Gentiles beginning at Babylon. So to give you a little bit of a context, the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar, they conquered Israel as a direct result of judgment. Okay, and this happened around 606 BC. Okay, there's a lot of fluctuations in some of these ancient dates. So I am going to go over some things that may or may not be absolutely solid in terms of dates from the past, only because a lot of the dates that we have are based on multiple different writings, and we have to kind of correlate events and the reigns of certain kings in certain time periods. But it's generally accepted, okay, that the 606 BC timeline or time frame for when Babylon took over Israel happened at that time, okay? And then, interestingly enough, about 19 years later, there was a revolt, okay? So I believe it was Zedekiah was somebody who was the vassal king that basically Nebuchadnezzar had put in charge after he had taken the nation captive. And 19 years after that initial campaign, um, they rebelled, and Nebuchadnezzar basically decides, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore. And he just goes ahead and levels the city. He basically destroys Jerusalem. Okay. So when he takes over the nation, okay, this is known as the captivity of the nation of Israel. This is when Israel's captivity as a nation begins, is when Nebuchadnezzar takes over. And prior to this, they were never really taken over from any foreign power. Okay, this is really the first one where they were, as a full, complete, whole nation, they were completely taken over by a foreign power. And it was the first of several kingdoms that were going to follow, which is actually prophesied also in the book of Daniel. Daniel was given actually, specifically, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream where he sees an image, and the dream was interpreted by Daniel to mean that there were kingdoms that were coming that were going to rule everything. The first one being Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. And so, anyway, the captivity of the nation begins at 606 BC, roughly, and it was known as the captivity of the nation. 19 years later, around 587 BC, about 587, 586 BC, around that time frame, uh, the second siege in Jerusalem is where the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay. This event is called the desolations of Jerusalem. This is what it's referred to, okay, in the scriptures. All right. So, the question that I think we need to ask is, why was Israel judged in that way? Right? So I'm going to be touching base on some events that occurred leading up to the captivity of the nation and the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, because this is all going to play a part into why the June date for the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled came about in 1967. I'm going to get us there. All right. So basically, the nation of Israel disobeyed God's command. Okay. He had specifically told Israel, okay, remember, I've told you guys before that Israel was an agrarian culture. They had the entire priesthood depended on the sacrifices that were provided from livestock as well as from the offerings that were made from the land produce. Okay. So for a period of 490 years, Israel neglected the Sabbath of the land. They were supposed to maintain every 7 years, they were to do no work on the land whatsoever. All right. So from the time that they entered the land, God said, I want you to work the land for 6 years. And on the sixth year, I'm going to give you three times as much yield so that it will cover the sixth year and the seventh year where you're not supposed to work, and also the following year, which is the year you're supposed to work the fields again, because it takes a while for um, the produce to come through. So God promised them three times as much on year six so that they could literally take a break for a straight year. Okay. The problem, and I mean, when we think about it, we think, man, it could have just stayed working for no without working the land for a whole year. Would have been great, right? Well, the problem with all of this is that Israel, as a nation, got greedy. They figured, well, if we're going to get three times as much in the sixth year, we can work the seventh year and try to get more. And so they did this for a period of 490 years. All right. And that really was a big deal to God. Okay. Um, when, when, basically, let's turn real quick to Leviticus chapter 26. All right, because I want you guys to kind of to see this. Let me see here. Leviticus 26. Okay. Not letting me share my screen again. Are you guys able to see my screen or no?
No,
It's not letting me share my screen.
not seen it yet.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay, I got it. I got it. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. All right. So if you look here in the section here where it shows in Leviticus 26, okay? Specifically, Leviticus 26, verse 34. I'm going to show you here, and I want you to read this. It says here, then, and this is a commandment that God gives to me. He says, then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate, and you be in your enemy's land, uh, even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. Okay? So God told them in the law, specifically in the book of Leviticus, he told them that if they did not observe the Sabbath of the land, he would send their enemies to displace them and kick them out of the land so that they can actually, the land can enjoy the Sabbaths. So he is telling them here in Leviticus that that is what he's going to do. Okay. Um, and with that, it says that in Leviticus 20, the same chapter in verse 43, it says, "The land also shall be left of them and shall enjoy her Sabbaths while she lies desolate without them. And they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity even because they despised my judgments and because their soul abhorred my statutes." So again, God is reiterating here in Leviticus that they would be kicked out of the land, all right, and that their enemies would basically take them into captivity so that the land can enjoy her Sabbaths. Okay. Now, the reason why we know this, that it was supposed to be that it was over a period of 490 years, is also in part because of something that the prophet Jeremiah specifically mentions. Okay. And let me show you here in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11. And it says here that this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Okay. And so he says it here in Jeremiah that they're going to serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. And it doesn't mention anything specifically about the 490-year period, but I want you to notice what it says in Second Chronicles 36. Okay. And I know I seem like I'm going fast here or I'm speeding up, but there's a reason why I wanted you guys to kind of get into this because there's a lot of information. You guys, if you need to catch up, it's okay to it's okay to, you know, to slow down. Just let me know if you have any questions along the way. All right. But here in Second Chronicles chapter 36, beginning at verse 19 through 21, it says, "And they burnt the house of God." This is what Nebuchadnezzar did, okay? "And they burnt the house of God and brake down the wall of Jerusalem and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 60 That's 70 years. A score is 20, three score is 60, plus 10 is 70. Okay? So this is significant, okay? Because that means that God basically held Israel um, accountable for observing the Sabbath of the land so that um, as a direct result of their disobedience of observance of that Sabbath, they were kicked out of the land so that 70 years is the total number of Sabbaths that they were supposed to make up. So if you were to take 490 years and every 7 years you're supposed to have a Sabbath, so you divide 490 by 7, you get 70. Okay? Now, this is a little bit, this is interesting for also another reason, because it makes you wonder why is it that God would just take 490 years? Now, I want you to think about this. Why would God take 490 years to exact any kind of punishment on Israel? And I will submit to you that part of the reason for this is because God follows a principle of forgiveness with Israel. Do you remember when Peter says to Jesus and he goes, "How often should I forgive my brothers? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus says to him, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. So when you do the math, 70 times 7, you come up with 490, which means that it seems that 490 is the threshold where judgment begins. And since we are called not to judge people, we're called to forgive. I believe that this thing about forgiveness will play a role in God's judgment of our current situation so that we don't have to keep count of 490. I think that God takes care of that. Okay, that there are judgments in place that God will execute for those that are oppressed. God executes righteousness and judgment for all who are oppressed. So I think that there's a really interesting correlation here to the concept of when Jesus taught Peter about forgiveness and God's forgiveness with Israel. So there's a direct correlation there, but I just wanted to throw that in there as a small side thing. Um, with that, okay, and we're going to get into a little bit of a technicality here now, but I want you guys to recognize that God had actually given Israel very few numerical prophecies, Jeremiah being one of them, okay? The where Jeremiah says there's 70 years that they're going to be under Babylon. And there's a few other prophecies where God is numeric in its structure, where God specifically gives certain numbers. And one of those prophecies is actually in the prophet Ezekiel, and it has everything to do with the captivity of the nation and the desolations of Jerusalem. Okay? So in Ezekiel chapter 4, and I already have it here in front of you, all right? Chapter 4, beginning at verse 1, God tells Ezekiel that he wants to set up a model of the city of Jerusalem and basically representing the city as well as the nation itself. But he's basically telling them, hey, I want you to set up a model of the city of Jerusalem, and I want you to make this as a sign to Israel. All right, and let's read. It says this, and it's from verses 1 through 6. Thou also, son of man, take thee a tile and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem, and lay siege against it, and build a fort against it, and cast a mount against it, and sent a camp also against it, and set battering rams against it round about. Moreover, take unto thee an iron pan, and set it for a wall of iron between thee and the city, and set thy face against it, and it shall be besieged, and thou shalt lay siege against it. This shall be a sign to the house of Israel. It's a really important thing that he's doing here. He's, as a prophet, Ezekiel is setting up this model to communicate to the children of Israel a sign, something that is going to directly impact them. Okay. And he's got all of these things from, rams, battering rams to a wall of iron. He sets all of these things that have symbolic meaning in Jewish culture. And he's saying, I want you to do this as a sign to the house of Israel. And he says, now the next verse, verse 5, for I have laid upon thee the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days, so shalt thou bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. Here's what's significant about this whole thing, okay? Uh, and I want to kind of go over a little bit on the significance of the verses here, specifically with regards to the prophecy in Ezekiel. All right, there's a lot of interpretation. I don't want you to leave this Bible study thinking that everything I'm about to say is solid stone. It is exactly like this. There's a lot of things that we are unsure of about in terms of timing and history, but there are things that we can actually glean from these verses that gives us some insight, prophetic insight into future events. Okay. Basically, uh, Ezekiel is telling them that their captivity, he's telling them this is going to happen and it's going to go beyond 70 years, right? The first 70 years is basically a judgment specifically on the Sabbath of the land. All right. Israel is taken captive by Babylon. They're carried away. And if you have read your Bibles and remember in Nehemiah, the the Nehemiah had was the one responsible for bringing the people of Israel back into the land so that they can rebuild the city, right? And Ezra, the priest, was the one responsible for the rebuilding of the temple. During that time, if you read the last few chapters of Nehemiah, it said that the majority of the nation, there was only 50,000 either people or families. I think it was 50,000 families that returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the city walls. But the majority of the nation refused to go back. Had a life for themselves. They built lives. Many of them married the local women there. They had families in those other countries. They were scattered. It wasn't just Babylon, it was everywhere else. I mean, they were scattered to the point that even up until the days of Jesus, there were people coming on the day of Pentecost from all the surrounding nations because they were still in captivity. They were still, they were not, um, they could have returned to the land, but they didn't. The majority of the nation remained outside of the land where God told them, I'm going to take you out of the land and I'm going to bring you back. Well, they refused to come back. So God is telling Ezekiel that their captivity now is being extended. So originally it was 70 years, right? But now he's saying it's going to be 430 years because he says, lie on one side, on your left side for 390 days each day for a year. And then he says, now lie on your right side for 40 days so that it's in total, it's 430 years or 430 days lying down is indicative of 430 years of their captivity. Okay. The first 70 is designated specifically for the Sabbath of the land, which leaves us with 360 years left. Okay. If you, when we start doing the math, okay, we know that Israel remained in captivity beyond those 360 years. Okay. There was nothing about the 406 or 360 years that shows that they come back in so much that even by the time Jesus comes around, they're still scattered around the nations. Okay. They have some autonomy in Jerusalem. They have all these things, but they're still under the authority of Rome. Okay. But the majority of the nations still scattered everywhere. Okay. They're among all the other nations, which is part of the reason why in the gospel we're told to go into all nations. Okay. Because we're going out there to reach them with the gospel. Okay. So in this process, so there's some mathematical things that I want to point out to you in this entire gamut of numbers that there's a way to kind of look at the calculation of these things. Okay. Um, because the nation refused to obey after they were scattered among the nations, right? That first, God says, okay, I'm going to extend your time another 360 years. And this is because of their disobedience. Okay. Remember, they were kicked out of the land because of the Sabbath of the land, and now their punishment is being extended because they didn't come back. And they're not coming back. God is like, no, I'm gonna extend your punishment. Well, here's the problem. All right. If you look in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 18, let me bring it up here real quick. All right. Leviticus 26, verse 18, the same chapter that we were reading earlier. Okay. It says, and if you will not yet for all this hearken to me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. This is an interesting tidbit of information, okay? Because he actually, in this chapter, he says it about 4 different times. 4 different times. He tells him, if after all of this you refuse to obey me, I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. All right. Now, this is important because when you start to look at everything that God has already told him, he's like, I'm extending your punishment, but now I'm gonna, if you don't obey me after your punishment has been extended, what does the law of Moses say? The law of Moses says, if after all of this, and he tells him, after I've scattered you among the nations, if you still refuse to obey me, I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. Okay? So if you have a total of 360 years and you multiply it by 7, you end up with 2,520 years. Okay? There's a thing where if you were to use a prophetic year of 360-day years, you can convert it to what it would be in our calendar, which is roughly about 2,483 years, 9 months, 21 days. A lot of details there. I know it's gonna mess you guys up if you try to get all this, right? So, but I want to try to put this in perspective. All right. If you were to, from the time that Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem, and you count forward 70 years, you end up with 536 BC when they were released by Cyrus. Okay? King Cyrus. If you were to count 2,483 years in our calendar, you end up with the year 1948. Why is that significant? Because from the year, if you start counting 70 years after the captivity of the nation, and you count forward to 2,483 years and change, you end up with the reestablishment of the nation into the land of Israel in May 14, 1948. And the thing is that when Nebuchadnezzar had taken over the captivity of the nation, I told you guys that 19 years later, there was a rebellion and he ended up destroying Jerusalem, which was the desolations of Jerusalem. Well, if you were to apply the same number of 2,483 years and change to the date of when 70 years after the desolations of Jerusalem took place, and you start counting from that period forward, you end up with June 1967. That was the year and the month and the year when Israel took back Jerusalem from among the nations. Now, this is important when it comes to establishing this time period of how the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled as of June 1967. June 1967 was the year in which Israel took back Jerusalem. And this is a fulfillment of a numerical prophecy that is within the last, 50 years or 60, 70 years now, over that, over 70 years, right? Actually, it's a lot more than that now, probably. It's probably closer to 80 or 70 or 80 years. Anyway, the thing is that Israel, the fulfillment of this numerical prophecy in a generation that is so close to our timeline gives us some insight into the times where Jesus is referring to right before or preceding the rapture of the church, the gathering of his people to him, according to Luke chapter 21. All right. This is really significant. There's a lot of details here. Okay. Israel experienced a lot of miraculous things when during the Six Day War. I recommend you guys watch this documentary, and it's referred to Against All Odds, and it was basically a series that discussed all of these supernatural events that occurred that during the Six Day War, where they took back Jerusalem, that was they were in a lose-lose situation, and because of the miraculous things, they actually won. Okay. One of those was where this one guy by the name of David Yaniv, he was an Israeli soldier with his entire unit, and they were completely outnumbered. They were about to get ambushed by a troop of Egyptian soldiers, and they were completely outnumbered. They were going to be obliterated. And suddenly, everybody from the enemy camp started pointing to the sky and saying, "Hey, Abu Ibrahim is basically saying Father Abraham, because they were seeing Abraham in the sky, preventing them, telling them, don't attack these people. And so they literally gave up their weapons and things like that. A lot of really wild testimonies happened in Israel at the time. Okay. Um, and Jerusalem had been under direct control of Gentile powers up until June 7th, I believe. They actually took back Jerusalem, but the Six-Day War ended on the 10th of June. Okay, but it wasn't until the 7th where they took back Jerusalem. And Jerusalem had been under Gentile control. And Jesus had said that Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So I want you to notice that there are events, historical events, that correlate to recent history in which Jesus is referring to a period of time, okay, that has direct correlation to us. All right, because he actually gives us those details. And here's the thing, okay? Um, Jesus is giving us a series of events. So let me kind of put this in context for you, okay? When Jesus tells us about the events in Luke, he says that the children of Israel are going to be scattered around the nations and that Jerusalem is going to be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. The majority of what he says up to that point is a is what happens during the first 70 years of the up to 70 AD. And then the other half of the verse is almost 2,000 years later. It's like there's a huge gap within one verse, okay, and a huge gap of time. And when he ends that gap of time with, the Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, the very next verse, he begins a series of things like these events are going to occur that culminate in the coming of the Son of Man in a cloud with power and glory. All right. And so the thing that I want you to kind of so what I want to kind of bring up to your mind here, okay, is that there's a lot of us who are taught in the pre-tribulation camp, okay, that there's no the imminency of the pre-tribulation rapture, that there's no preceding signs that result in, that tell you when these things are going to happen, that the pre-trib rapture is imminent, that nobody knows the day or the hour. That's how it's taught, okay? The truth of the matter is that if our understanding of the passages in Luke are accurate, Jesus says that everything that happens in the passages in Luke happened before the events of Matthew and Mark, which are a post-tribulation account. Okay? Matthew 24 through 25, I'm sorry, yeah, Matthew 24 through 25 and Mark 13, it emphasizes the fact that no one knows the day or the hour when the very end is going to come. But the Gospel of Luke tells us that we're not to live in a way that in which the events in Luke take us by surprise. In other words, Luke is telling you things in advance that are going to happen right before the rapture. Okay. And it's important. The important part is that to expect from this portion of the study, okay, is that even though is that we're actually going to have some difficult times ahead of us, and they're really bad, but they are not the tribulation. Okay. It's not going to be impossible. Okay. But I believe that because we will know exactly what to expect immediately before that rapture occurs, that we'll actually have increased hope and expectation that drives us, that drives the bride to be faithful, to be vigilant. to be expectant and even aggressive about our devotion and our service despite all that's going to happen. All right. And this is because we're going to see him. I mean, this is an expectation of these events are going to occur, and it's not the tribulation period. This is what I want you to get in your mind. The events that Jesus lists in verse 25 of Luke chapter 21 are the events that precede the rapture, not the second coming. So, with that in mind, that means that when the midnight hour is approaching, the bride is finally going to be able to be reunited with the bridegroom. Okay? In verse 25 through 27, and we read it earlier, Jesus says this. Okay? And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So, this is what I want you to understand. There are things that are going to happen. There's signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. And on upon the earth, distress of nations. We're going to witness this, all right, with perplexity. And then the sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear. Whether that means that they're going to lose their minds or they're literally going to have a heart attack and die out of fear because of what's coming. And all of this is before the tribulation. As a matter of fact, I think that the events here in verse 25 and 26 and in verses 25 and 26, I believe that these events coupled with the apex of the rapture of the church, the coming, seeing Jesus come in the cloud with the power and glory. I think that with the apex of that event, it's literally going to be the catalyst. It's going to be the catalyst that thrusts the entire world into despair to the point that that's what's going to cause them to want to give up their sovereignty. These specific events with the rapture at the apex will be the catalyst that drives all people, tribes, nations, and tongues to follow the man of sin and surrender their sovereignty and ultimately lose their souls in the process. Okay? In other words, if you think that there's not going to be difficult times or there's not going to be any kind of suffering right before the rapture, I don't think you should hold that view. As a matter of fact, I think that you should be arming yourself with the mind that these events are going to occur. And that if you're that generation that's going to be seeing that end come before you die, guess what? You're going to be seeing some difficult times ahead of you. But the difficult times, I think, are really going to invigorate the body of Christ, specifically those that are faithful, because they're going to know it's coming. It's coming. It's around the corner. It's almost here. The bridegroom is almost at the door. Okay? Because these events are not simple. And I won't pretend to know exactly how these things are going to play out, but I wanted to kind of maybe evaluate some of these comments. Um, I wanted to kind of evaluate these comments to see how how these things are going to play out, because I think that there's a lot there. Hold on a second. There's a lot here going on with regard to the events that lead up to the rapture, where I think that we need to arm ourselves with a mindset so that when these things happen, it's not going to be the tribulation. None of the things that are written in Luke are going to be the tribulation, but people will believe it is. Okay? And I think that that these events are going to be so heavy because I mean, just look. I mean, there's a lot that we don't understand, right? And let's look at some of the things that he talks about here. There's going to be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. Do that portion first. All right. Signs in the sun, moon, and the stars. That could be anything. It doesn't, Jesus does not give us details about the signs in the sun, moon, and the stars. However, we can infer to these signs as being related to events that are stellar or interstellar in nature and related to the festivals, the feast days that Israel operates in. Okay, because remember, they're an agrarian culture, and God would often use the signs or the seasons. Remember that the sun, the moon, and the stars, God, when God created them in Genesis, He says, "Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." And the word for seasons is the word moedim. It's the word for festivals. So it's making a direct correlation with signs and festivals. Okay. So when you look at those verses and it says signs in the sun, moon, and the stars, we can probably make the assumption safely, okay, to by interpreting it to mean that these signs, these celestial signs that are going to occur, may actually be related to their being coinciding with the festivals. So I want you to keep that in mind because I think that that's going to play a major role. And, we've actually had, tetrads. These are, signs where you have blood moons that fall on the days of feast days throughout history that were surrounding significant events with regard to Israel. Okay. We had, all kinds of things. I mean, as far as the sun goes, I mean, signs in the sun could be solar flares. Okay, it could be anything. We don't know that. But as far as signs in the sun or in the moon are concerned, um, we know that, for example, in the 1400s, like from 1493 to 1494, um, the on Passover and on Tabernacles, there was a blood moon during those festivals on 1493 as well as 1494. Now, those tetrads, they happened, they began happening the year after the Spanish Inquisition began. All right, so you had 1492 as the Spanish Inquisition. The next 2 years, you had blood moons landing on Passover and Tabernacles. And again, in way further into the future, in 1949 to 1950, right? We had similar situations where in 1949 as well as 1950, you had on Passover and on Tabernacles, you had a blood moon land on those feast days. Well, these now happen after the 1948 Israel coming back into the land. So again, these are important markers in history where you have these tetrads that fall. These are after the event in question. Okay. Um, however, you also had in 1967, in 1968, you had the Passover and Tabernacles in the year 1967, which is the same year as the Jewish uh, taking back of the city of Jerusalem. So you also had, here's another reinforcement of that date of time, where during the Six Day War, the year of the Six Day War, you had tetrads landing on Passover and on Tabernacles, not only in the same year of the taking back of Jerusalem, but also the following year. Okay, Jerusalem was recaptured in 1967, June 7th, 1967. All right. Um, we also had ones uh, even later on, like we in 2013 to 2015. And we had a comet on Hanukkah that came through in 2013. That was a major event that occurred on Hanukkah. Okay, and Hanukkah is in the Bible, by the way. All right, another word for Hanukkah is the Feast of Dedication. Okay. The Feast of Dedication, Jesus observed that feast. Okay. So this is one of those feasts that are that in which they had a celestial sign where a comet came through, right? And you had also in 2014, you had Passover and Tabernacles, okay, where the blood moon landed on Passover and Tabernacles on those days. All right. In 2015, you had blood moons on in the new year in March and on Passover and on the Feast of Trumpets and in Tabernacles. Okay, I mean, all these were events that occurred during that period. At that time, these things, everyone was trying to say, "Well, this is when Jesus is coming. This is when Jesus is coming." I think that these tetrads have been culminating, and we got even more coming down the road. There's more tetrads landing on feast days in from 2032 to 2033, and again in 2043 to 2044. So these are things that are yet coming. Okay. But I want you to kind of take into consideration that the signs in the sun, moon, and the stars, what I think that could be. Okay. And again, I'm only speculating here, but I want you to think about this. I think it's a combination of these tetrads together with things happening in solar flares and things happening with shooting stars, right? Things that are happening. What if, what if, okay, think about this, that the sea and the waves roaring has something to do either with the moon, because the moon affects the tides, or because of some meteor that's coming that impacts Earth. I don't know. We have no idea. Okay. But I want you to kind of put it in perspective that the sea and the signs in the sun are nothing more than they're signs. They're things to draw your attention to look at. These are visible things. And because they're in the sun, the moon, and the stars, that they might be actually correlated to the Moedim, the feast days, the festivals that Israel observes. Okay? It could be. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying throwing that out there so that you understand that these are things that we need to maybe be observing to give us an indication of what comes after, which is the part that we really are not comfortable with talking about. And what I'm talking about is on earth distress of nations with perplexity. Because if the signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars have a direct application to that distress of nations, I don't know what could be other than a meteor coming, okay? Or some other thing. We don't know. Could it be a meteor? Could it be a UFO? Who knows what it is, right? Or whatever it is that we're told that can cause the nations distress with perplexity. That means that the nations are going to be so under so much stress and under so much power. The distress that the nations are going to go through is going to push them to the breaking point. When it says distress of nations with perplexity, that means that the nations of the world, the United States, Brazil, Europe, China, Russia, it doesn't matter who it is. I think that the distress of nations is going to push people to the breaking point, so much so that it's going to create what follows after. Nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. The birth pains that we talked about, the 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 beginnings of sorrows are following after. And I think that the distress of the nations that's mentioned here in Luke is part of what's going to lead into the birth pains that are coming down the road. And then it says, the sea and the waves roaring, right? I think we already touched on that, but the possibility of what that could mean, the sea is often used as a euphemism for the nations. But in this case, it looks like it seems to be a, a reference to an actual the physical ocean itself, the seas, okay, and the waves, okay. What does that mean? Could it be earthquakes that will start creating tidal waves? or or tsunamis. Could be. But understand that all of these things are things that we will experience before the rapture comes. These aren't tribulation things. These are things that are yet to come that the church, the bride, will experience. And it's not the wrath of God, it's not the tribulation period, it is what happens before then. Okay. And then you have that other verse that says, men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth. This verse seems to indicate that there is a correlation between the events of the sun and the moon and the stars with the distress of the nations and the sea and the waves roaring, and men's hearts failing for fear, for looking after those things that are coming on the earth, things from outside coming in. That's if we're going to be really or hyper literal about that passage, that their hearts are going to fail them because of what's coming on the earth. And it's in that momentum of events that the next verse says, "Then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a power coming in a cloud with power and great glory." I think we need to really pay attention to these details. And I would like for us to consider that the world events, that whatever, if you thought that the pre-tribulation rapture was going to, that everything was going to be hunky-dory and there was just going to be a massive influx of people getting saved before like a big um, revival where everybody gets saved. And I don't think that's exactly going to be the case. I think that it's going to be a whole lot of trouble that's going to precede the events that lead up to the rapture. And those events are going to create such a chaos that when the church is taken up, I think everybody that's left, okay, is going to be thrust into all kinds of chaos, even worse, because that's only going to result in the a system in which people will not only give up their sovereignty, but they're going to be completely demon possessed in mass. Okay. The idea that the Antichrist, that when he comes up, whatever, he's going to, start beheading people. And that's on a global scale. And I want you to understand that the whole world has to fundamentally change for that to become the norm. There are some major things that are going to thrust the nations into so much disarray that they're going to give up their sovereignty. They're going to change the entire global system. Everything from financial systems to government, everything is going to be altered and changed. But before that, we're going to see a series of events that will be the catalyst for that to occur. And you and I are poised to see these things begin to happen. I don't know when they're going to happen, but I would say you should keep an eye out for signs in the sun, signs in the moon, signs in the stars. Keep an eye out for when the nations become distressed. Everybody becomes distressed with perplexity. When you start seeing tsunamis or the sea and the waves roaring, whatever that means yet, I don't, like I said, I don't exactly know. But when you start seeing these things and then men's hearts failing them for fear, right? Could it be that these things happen all at once? I don't know. Could it be that they happen right after each other? Maybe. Who knows? But Jesus said this right after he says that then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. The very next verse, Jesus says, and when these things begin to come to pass. Lift up your heads because your redemption draws nigh. Guys, I think that we need to look at the events as they're written. Jesus said in the beginning of Luke 21, he gives us a series of events that we know are the birth pangs. But he said, but before all those things, all this other stuff is going to happen. And we need to recognize that if we think that our escape plan, so to speak, is not going to have any kind of trouble associated with it before it happens, you are sadly mistaken. Because Jesus is telling us what the signs will be right before he takes us. The things that are going to occur right before, and we're already past, verse 24 has already come in and passed and been fulfilled. June 1967. That was just not long ago. And now we're stepping into a different era where it looks like verse 25 is about to come to pass or it may have already begun. So we need to arm ourselves with the right mind as we step into this time. That we are stepping into some really exciting times. It isn't that we should think about what's to come with trepidation or fear, but rather with anticipation, with expectation that we are going to see our bridegroom, that we're going to be able to see Jesus. We're going to stand before him. Jesus told us in Luke, watch therefore and pray that you may be accounted worthy to escape these things and to stand before the Son of Man. So that's my call for you guys today. Now, that's my study for today. And I'd like to open up the floor right now for any comments, for anything whatsoever. Anybody who has any comments or questions that you might want to ask, I'm open for discussion.
Hey, Stan, how you doing?
John, it's good to see you, man. How you doing,
Nice to
brother?
meet you. Yeah, I just really like how you're really like correlating everything. I really never really realized a lot of these things before. I've been ever since you gave me the references back in 2019, my faith and my understanding of many things has been growing, and just really appreciate you taking your time out and presenting this great information with us. Thank you.
Guys, by the way, in case you don't know, John was a friend of mine from when I went on deployment on the Abe Lincoln a while ago. That's where we first met, and it was really cool when we became really good friends at that time. So I want to introduce you guys to John Webb.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Comments, concerns, questions?
This was awesome. I really like the way you kind of just like what John was saying, the way you correlated everything. I just thought it was really insightful, and I'm always curious how you come across these things, like how you just read these things. It's kind of funny.
Well, when I thought about that whole thing about June 1967, um, when it occurred to me, June 1967 was the fulfillment of the times of the Gentiles. I was like, that's when they finally, Israel came out of their captivity in 1948 and they took back Jerusalem in 1967. That was the fulfillment. That whole 2,520 year period or 2,400, depending on what calendar you use, that was the fulfillment. I mean, that was the whole prophecy. That was everything, right? And now that that's passed, the next thing on the timeline is are those events leading up to the coming of Christ for the bride. So my thing was, when I did the Bible study, I remember how I told you guys, hey, I think that we're right at this point in the timeline, and then I kind of skipped over the details of what was of everything so we can go on with the rest of the study. But I realized, like, what? I want to go back and I want to focus on that gap between verses 24 and 25, which is why the title of the Bible study is Between the Verses, because that's where we are right now. And I don't exactly know if the signs in the sun, moon, and the stars have actually begun, but we might actually be seeing something coming up with that. And I honestly believe that it could be that it's a combination. It's not just one thing. It could be a combination of interstellar objects like Three Eye Atlas or any of these other big, things going through a certain constellation at a certain time of year. Um, it could be uh, the whole thing with the UFO disclosure with the government. You know, that could play a role. I just started brainstorming and realizing, man, look at what's happening in the world right now. And this is what Jesus said is going to be next in the timeline. So I was like, this is interesting. Maybe these things do have something to do with the next set of events, which is the signs in the sun, moon, and stars. That's how I came, to focus on that. All right.
That's awesome. I still stand by what I think. Like I've maybe talked to you and Rick and maybe Jamal about this, but I really do think that the whole thing with Jesus's return is going to be correlated with like some alien invasion or something.
You
I
know
really
what?
do. Because it's what I think is going to happen, and this is very broad, but I mean it's specific but broad. It's going to be like they're going to make it seem like there is an extraterrestrial coming to attack the Earth, and the planet needs to unite. We need to come together under one leadership and fight against what's coming so we can preserve humanity. And
It's
you
gonna
know,
sound benevolent, but it's
it's
actually, yeah,
exactly, and you know what? They're going to have people on the earth that obviously the Christians that are going to be like, no, Jesus is the one that's coming, and then they're going to say, no, if you're not for the people of earth, then you shouldn't be here. You should be like excommunicated, or you should be like killed, because you're on their side, and that's what's going to lead into like the mark of the beast. Like, well, if you're really for the people of earth, then you need to take this mark and show that you're really for us, something like that. I don't know, but I really think that they're going to pull something like that because I just don't see another way of the whole planet being under one rule of one government unless something external was coming. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So, anyways, that's my 2 cents.
nice. Sheldon, Jamal, Gia, you guys got anything? Rick?
Hey guys, I'm just sorry I'm multitasking here, but yeah, definitely. I think like you guys just said, I think we're living in that period where start seeing signs and wonders. No coincidence that all this Three Atlas stuff and the more and all this stuff started happening in the past you know three 3 years, and the whole red heifer stuff with that's went on with Israel. So I think, yeah, definitely it's that time before um the rapture happens. So definitely.
Guys, for those of you who don't know, Sheldon, who just came on right now, who just spoke, he's actually from church with me, from my church. He's a good friend of mine. His wife is currently hanging out with Mayumi right now, so uh,
Nice. Welcome.
yeah. But he's a great guy. I wish you guys
Yes,
should.
they actually have me multitasking right now.
I kind of figured. If I didn't have this today, I'd probably be there with you, brother. Oh, Gia's got her baby right now, so she's not able to talk, but that's okay, Gia. I love you, sweetie. Gia's my sister-in-law. Jamal, how about you, man? I know you got something to say about all this. Come on, give it to me, bro. Maybe he fell asleep.
He's probably like not by his phone, not able to respond because
Probably.
that's how it was with me. At times I was like in my kitchen and my phone was in my room or something, and I couldn't like turn on the sound.
Yeah. Rick, how about you, man?
Well, I mean, it's all as usual, just pretty incredible stuff. Um, I'm still driving, so just been listening. Um, I mean, I just want to touch on the one thing that I think I mentioned to you before, is that, yeah, it would make sense that all systems that we take for granted are going to be thrown into chaos. Things that we think we can predict are no longer going to be predictable. And if something like you said, like if it was a meteor or something celestial hitting, striking the earth, of course, all that stuff is going to happen. Everything is going to be turned upside down. We won't be able to predict the behaviors of animals nor the behavior of people because something like that. I mean, because you don't know how people are going to react when. I mean, because people are very nonchalant about so many different things. There's even, a growing movement of people that are very cynical and they just think, oh, nothing ever happens. Like nothing ever happens. Oh, whether it's the political world or anything else. Like, one politician said, oh, the world's going to end. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, this one's going to do that. Oh, no, it's not. When it comes to even people like that, where something actually like a doomsday event actually happening, it's going to blow everyone's mind, and there's going to be many people that won't be able to handle it and will absolutely stroke out, have heart attacks. Their systems in their own body will fail.
Yeah. The more I thought about the distress of nations, I started going over scenarios in my head about what could cause the nations to be in distress. And I think it's a cascading effect of problems. You have one major thing that happens, and that affects another thing. And then another problem comes that directly affects that thing, which cascades to another problem. And it just goes and goes and goes. And I'll give you a scenario. Let's say, and this again, I'm just throwing out there, I'm not saying this will happen. I'm just saying I'm brainstorming about what could be. Okay. Let's say there's a major solar flare, right? He says sun, moon, and stars. So let's start with the sun. A major solar flare that suddenly happens and destroys a bunch of our satellites. Our communications gone. Our military systems gone. Think about it. Our security gone, right? You won't be able to talk with anybody on your cell phone, won't be able to use the internet. You're cut off, okay? There's no way to defend. You don't have any more way of defending against attack, okay? You have, and then, and that's just one thing, right? And then what if suddenly that happens as we're looking at a meteor, trying to track it? And now we're debilitated and we can't do it. We don't know how to determine what's going on. Or some other thing, some other threat from outer space, whatever that is, right? And then what? When people find out about this, markets crash because there's no way to keep up with the numbers. People won't know what's happening. The financial systems of the world can be crippled, right? It's a cascading effect. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that will start going wrong, and nobody will know what to do. So once the rapture or the church is taken away at that apex event I told you about, that's when a savior guy is going to show up and give everybody hope to say, "I know how to fix this," because they're going to be primed for somebody like the Antichrist. The whole world is going to be under so much stress and distress that they're going to be ready for something like that. It's not just sudden, like for, no, there's a series of events I think that's going to debilitate the whole earth. And when you have a bunch of people missing, then it could be that the systems that were in place are no longer good. They have to start a new system altogether because now they're going to think, oh, there's a threat coming. And that's what Speedy said. that they're saying it's a threat from some alien force, but in reality, it's the Antichrist system setting up for the Armageddon. So who knows? Who knows? I mean, there's so much that we can just, you know, we can guess, just wonder what it could be. So,
Well, I mean, well, that's where, I'm saying, like, imagine what that would be like when everything goes topsy-turvy. Compare it to, I mean, just a thought experiment of going to a place like New York City with all the people that are in it, shut off their internet and shut off their water. How many hours before they start not only killing themselves, but killing each other, you
yeah,
know? And then compare that to some sort of major global catastrophe, an actual global catastrophe, not like a man-made one.
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty insane to think what people will be willing to do. But I mean, yeah, they'll be willing to give up everything, anything and everything.
All right. Well, Jamal, are you able to hear me? John, you have something you want to say?
I'm just saying a lot of things are being stood up right now for the fall.
Mhm.
If you look at AI, quantum computing, all the debts of all the nations around the world, all the alliances they're going on with the BRICS and getting away from the American dollar and the United States Navy going down to Venezuela and messing with them, and then allies tied to Venezuela. Like it's just a lot of things are just getting, and how the Democratic Party's acting and all this transgender stuff. A lot of stuff's getting stood up right now for the fall. So
Yeah,
yeah, just more things are just showing itself like things are getting primed up.
gotcha. All right. Well, I know Jamal's he's actually got a
No, I'm
phone
back.
call. So, oh, you're back. Oh, so Jamal, you got any questions, comments, anything you want to put up?
Mm, Well, I mean, it's definitely given me more of. I need to watch the replay because I missed some, but it's definitely given me more perspective on like raptural events. Because I'm not very, I'm not gonna say I'm not good with math, but I'm not as good with the numbers. So to see all of these things coming together, it's hard for my brain to comprehend. So what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna watch the replay like 5 times and then call
I
you.
know.
So just don't even. Yeah, I'm gonna step back for right now. But you know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I got you. All right, guys. Well, look,
What one funny thing
yeah.
that like I literally when you're talking about the moons and like the celestial stuff, literally had a conversation with someone like 2 hours ago where they were talking about, oh, do you see the supermoon? And I was just like, supermoon? I'm like, another one? They're like, no, no, this one only comes around every 20 years. I'm like, like people keep on like calling it different names. I'm like, is it a different name this time? Because it seems like we have a supermoon or a blood moon like once or twice every year. And they always say like these things happen, at huge time spans. And I'm like, it seemed to be happening regularly.
Yeah, you're right. I heard the other day, I don't know where I heard it, but people are saying that it looks like there's, um, solar flares are starting to increase in intensity. Um, I think somewhere else I heard something about, earthquakes also. To be honest, I don't know how to find sources that are absolutely true and reliable on those things because there's so much information. Even the official sources, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can trust that either. But I think that for as far as what we're talking about here, I think that just keeping our eyes open and being attentive to what's happening in the world will give us, I think, a really clear sense because again, Matthew and Mark, the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, when they talk about the end times, they are emphasizing a lot about no one knows the day or the hour or this and that. That's the world. The world is not going to know that. We, however, are expected to know certain things. And That is really comforting because that means that he is giving us things in advance so that we don't lose hope on during those difficult moments, so that we can be strong and consistent, and that we have an anchor for our soul during those difficult times so that we don't go astray. So anyway, all right, guys, it is 9:22. It's been just a little over an hour now. If no one else has, I'm going to give you guys another second or two if you guys have any other questions or comments before I stop the video. All righty. Looks like I got the thumbs up. Guys, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the video now.